Hello and welcome for this special edition of the interview here on France 24. Our guest today is the former president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko. He joins us from the streets of the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Thank you very much for being with us today, Mr. Poroshenko.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for supporting Ukraine and delivering truth about events in Kyiv and in Ukraine for my nation. Thank you.
Yes. So exactly where are you and what is the situation in Kiev where you are right now?
I'm in the center of Kyiv. It is about 800 meters from the governmental quarter and about 4 kilometers from the Russian troops. Exactly now you see that we have an air raid alert because of the Russian bomber. And you know that today is the from the 24th of February. Today is the 5th day of the aggression, and all these days we have Russian missiles launching from Belarus and from Russia, and we have Iskander. We have an air raid which is heated Ukrainian civilian, and unfortunately about 500 civilians is already killed during this 5 days of war.
Right. Are you personally forced to sleep in a shelter as most of the inhabitants of the capital?
No, I'm staying in my party office, former party office, which is now the headquarters of the battalion of the territorial defense. I'm in this battalion. I'm organizing this battalion, and today we have lots of Kyivites, peaceful Kyivites, who is decisive to protect our nation. But I want to thank growing Western support, which come to Ukraine in the very difficult time, in the maybe the most difficult time of our history. This is happening from the very first day and hours even of the invasion, and the strong support is stopping, I hope, the attempt of Putin to ignite the World War III, and we are demonstrating that we are not afraid of Putin. We don't trust Putin. Putin is weak when we are together, and this is the absolutely great chance to demonstrate that when we united, when you are ready to present the sanction, when you're ready to present assistance, this is extremely important. And I want to thank here a very good friend of Ukraine and friend of mine, President Republic Macron, the Chancellor Scholz, and all the leaders of the EU, which making a very important decision yesterday, which was delivered by Ursula von der Leyen, who first time in the history of European Union make a decision to pay and to deliver to Ukraine the lethal weapons who can stop the aggressor and who can increase the price for Putin and for Russia to invade for Ukraine. Because Putin has launched an aggression not only against Ukraine, Putin launched an aggression against the EU, against France, and against the whole civilized world. And we here paying maybe the heaviest price, but we are protecting here also the freedom, the democracy, because the only thing of Ukraine is just we want to be free. We want to return back to the European family, and this is the reason why Putin hates us.
Right. Are you surprised, Mr. Poroshenko? I mean, you were president for years and you asked for more European support, that in a very, very quick succession, you had tough sanctions and you now even have weapons to be delivered. The EU foreign policy chief even mentioned fighter jets. I mean, this is quite incredible just in the space of a few days.
No, I'm not surprising. First of all, I'm proud that my team, me and my team, create Ukrainian army, and I'm proud the ability of defense and ability to hit Putin troops, which we demonstrate in delivering the evidence that Ukraine now has one of the strongest army in Europe. And that's why, by the way, this is the absolutely necessary decision to present to Ukraine membership action plan to NATO, because that would be a mutual beneficial cooperation, because with Ukraine, NATO would be stronger. And I think that this is extremely important, that at least you have a first time in your history the decision to present to Ukraine military jet, because can you imagine that 52 jets and helicopters of Russia was hit and landed by Ukrainian Air Force and anti-aircraft missile. We definitely need this missile. We definitely need this aircraft, because tomorrow, if it is not if it not be heated in Ukraine, tomorrow that would be appeared on the any European nation's flight. That's what nation airspace, and we definitely need no-flying zone on Ukraine, because this is Ukraine is a sovereign nation. We have rights to prohibit the entrance to our airspace, and that would be one of the most effective steps for the European security. And we definitely need some other steps. We're still waiting. Very much welcoming the yesterday decision of the European Union Council, because we definitely need to confirm the European Union membership for Ukraine. Ukraine already paid a huge price just for the ability, for the possibility to be European. We definitely need to be presented to Ukraine the candidate status now. And we definitely, that would be a strong motivation for Ukraine to be united, to keep strong, and to be cooperative with the European Union. We definitely need now, can you imagine, to launch an accession negotiation without any delay. This is the right answer to Putin, who can prohibit us to be returned back to the family. And the last, we definitely need to funds for recovery, make it available for Ukraine when we now in the very difficult situation. So we have an absolutely clear plan. And today, in 20 minutes, I will be in the Ukrainian parliament on the meeting with the whole government, parliament, and everybody. And I will immediately initiate the application for the European Union membership. And we really think that the same decisiveness which was demonstrated yesterday for the lethal weapons and military support of Ukraine would be demonstrated to all other member states, because publicly they said that they are supporting Ukraine. And with this situation, I think that the Ukraine demonstrating what does it mean to hit Russia, because Putin expected that Ukraine meet Russian troops with the flowers, and instead of the flowers, we meet them with the Molotov cocktail, which we called in Ukraine Bandera smoothies, and a lot of Russian tanks, Russian armed personnel carrier, Russian trucks with the Russian troops was hated, and the number of Russians who were killed during the last 5 days is exceeding 5,000. This is more than in Chechnya. This is more than in any other wars which Russia provide, more than in Syria or anywhere. And this is the way how we should stop stop Russia. But we want peace.
Right, Mr. President, speaking of peace, there's supposed to be some negotiations today between a Russian delegation, Ukrainian delegation. Do you have hope that this could lead to a ceasefire, or are you quite skeptical that it will lead to any kind of solution, at least temporary one?
Look, for the 5 years, I have a lots of negotiation with Russia, with Putin. And it was very often when we reach the results. We don't need anything extraordinary. We just think very simple thing. First, we need a ceasefire. Second, we don't have any compromise on the territorial integrity and independence of Ukraine. We have just very simple demand. Russians, get out of Ukraine. Everything else we can discuss.
Do you think Mr. Putin is ready to do that, that he realizes that he may have miscalculated, or do you think that he will try to push and even more military pressure on your country?
I think he make many mistakes. First of all, he underestimated the ability to defense of the new Ukrainian army who was created by Ukrainians, because Ukrainians are united, Ukrainians are not demoralized, Ukrainians are ready to fight. And Putin expected the blitzkrieg. Putin even prepared the press release. Then the second day, they keep Kiev, they enter and they remove all Ukrainian government. And we don't give any chance on them. And already Putin paid a huge price. Second, he is not expecting that the solidarity with Ukrainian would be so strong, and our Western partners can demonstrate such a unity in presenting the sanction. And sanction is now completely destroying the Russian economy. Sanction is giving the possibility that every Russian person who supports the killing of Ukrainians feel on his own pocket, because Russian currency, ruble, is devaluated 2 times on 50%. And that means that Russians start to be 2 times poorer. And this is just the beginning. Russian economy can be collapsed. Russian people can be protested against Putin. And Putin has no any other choice, if he can keep the country, like to withdraw the troops, make a ceasefire, and have a negotiation for the Russian security. We never attack Russia. We never have it in mind, and we never do that. The only thing we want is just peace, stop war, and get out Russian troops from Ukraine. And today, I think the whole world is with us. And I want to use, by the way, this opportunity to thank the French people, to thank the French government, to thank the President Macron, to thank, by the way, President Hollande, who both of them very closely cooperating with me. And I want to thank every single person who be today on the rally in Paris in supporting Ukraine. Я хочу подякувати українську діаспору в Парижі. I want to thank Ukrainian diaspora in Paris for being so decisive, for demonstrating such a unique solidarity. You are great. We are together. We are strong, and we defeat an aggressor. Definitely. Thank you very much, and merci beaucoup, les républiques.
Thank you very much, Mr. Poroshenko, for taking some of your time from the streets of Kiev. And thank you for watching this exclusive interview here on France 24. Our wall-to-wall coverage of the war in Ukraine continues here on France 24. Stay tuned.
Well, this meeting is going to go on all day, and all 193 member states of the General Assembly will have the chance to express their opinions on what is going on right now in Ukraine. And the hope, certainly from Western powers, is that the majority of countries will loudly and clearly condemn Russian aggression. Now, it's going to be particularly interesting to hear what the Global South has to say, what Asian countries, Latin American countries and African countries have to say on this issue, because of course they make up the vast majority of the member states of the General Assembly, and we have heard them express their opinions to an extent already during the Security Council meetings, and in particular the Kenyan ambassador really compare the situation and Russian aggression towards Ukraine to the way that Western powers behaved in their colonial past towards African countries and express solidarity with Ukraine. So we might expect more talk like that from powers from the Global South. What Western powers are really hoping for is to have a clear sign from the General Assembly that the world is galvanized in its condemnation of Russian aggression towards Ukraine. This meeting is putting forward a resolution which is non-binding, but it does carry a lot of weight. It's very rare to have this sort of General Assembly Assembly meeting. It's the first such meeting in 4 decades. And what the General Assembly can do is make recommendations for how to pursue peace talks, how to move forward to de-escalate, how to defend the UN Charter. They can make recommendations for setting up an investigations committee to log any war crimes committed during this Russian aggression. Also recommend an envoy and give more advice on how member states could impose more sanctions on Russia, for example.
Jessica, in the coming hours, the Security Council of the United Nations is also going to meet. There we understand that France will table a resolution focusing on humanitarian support for Ukraine. What can you tell us about that?
That's quite right. They're going to be putting forward a draft Security Council resolution. This is being put forward by France for humanitarian needs, for humanitarian access. This is the 5th Security Council meeting in a week, and this is the first resolution purely about humanitarian access, humanitarian aid, because, of course, the Council doesn't want to forget those civilians on the ground who are suffering as a consequence of this Russian invasion. Now, Russia could, of course, yet again veto a resolution, but it will once again shine a spotlight on the plight of civilians, and we will hear the heads of UN agencies speaking about the current situation there on the ground as hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians flee the violence there.
Let's get the perspective of Moscow now on the programme. Reporter Jake Cordell is there. And Jake, let's talk about the economy first, if we can, because Western sanctions do appear to be biting today. The ruble fell sharply at the start of trading this morning. The central bank announcing it's raising interest rates to 20%. Give us a sense of how ordinary Russians are reacting to all of this. Are there long queues, for example, outside the banks?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing Russians queuing up to take out their savings, either fearful that the Russian banking system won't be able to cope with the mass of people withdrawing their savings in some kind of bank run. Now, the central bank has said it's offering unlimited cash to banks to make sure that they can withdraw it, but that's just unlimited rubles, definitely not unlimited dollars and euros, with lots of Russians looking to switch their money into hard currency. We're already seeing prices rising in the shops as a result of this latest fall in the ruble, and shops have reported they've sold out of expensive electronic equipment, for instance, as people over the weekend just rushed to buy up whatever they could. They didn't want to be left with any rubles, knowing that their value would fall. Over the medium term, this is obviously going to lead to much higher inflation, and this is going to feed into hit Russians in the pocket. And what that means for the political situation is unclear here in Russia. We're already 8 years into an economic crisis. Russians were already poorer than they were 10 years ago before this happened. And this, if any rounds of previous sanctions are what to go by, it's clear that the Russian people are probably going to feel quite a big brunt of those sanctions.
Yeah, and despite the economic hit, Jake, we've seen in the past few days images of Russians going out in the streets to protest this war in Ukraine. I wonder if there's any way to establish whether or not those people that we've seen out in the streets represent a minority of Russians, or whether there are actually plenty of people who are really skeptical of Vladimir Putin's war.
It's very hard to tell how widespread these protest movements are. What we can say is there is a much more dissatisfaction now than there has been towards any previous round of Moscow's foreign policy, including obviously the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Whether they're a majority, probably not at this stage. If we think about that 2/3 of Russians rely only on state TV to get their information and news, and we know on Russian state TV, if you look at the pictures, they're not showing anything like what we know is going on the ground. They're not showing shelling in Kharkiv. They're not showing shelling in Kiev. They're not showing residents in Kiev cowering in underground bunkers. So it's unclear how much Russians really know what the picture is on the ground. What is clear is that those liberal people in cities, educated people that have access to the internet, that use it for their news source, most of them are very against this war. They're very concerned by what they're seeing. crucially, we're also seeing some key oligarchs coming out and criticizing, perhaps some softly, perhaps some in more stronger terms, criticizing what is going on. And that is not only a direct response to sanctions, but also what they're seeing going on the ground. So clearly there is not agreement here in Russia with what's going on. How widespread the discontent is unclear at the moment.
And Jake, just finally, we heard those rather alarming reports yesterday that Vladimir Putin was to put Russia's nuclear forces on high alert. It's been about 24 hours since we heard that. Do we know yet what that means in practice?
Well, we had an update earlier today from the Defence Ministry basically saying, yes, we've put them on high alert. But again, we don't really know what the details of that are. And we've had some comments out from Britain this morning. Their Defence Ministry hasn't seen any change in Russia's nuclear posture, as they call it. So it's unclear what that means. Again, we have to look at this perhaps in the context of a military campaign that clearly hasn't gone as well as Vladimir Putin was hoping. They've clearly got bogged down much more than they were expecting, and ahead of the negotiations which took place today. Lots of people thinking this could be some kind of posturing from Putin. The problem is, of course, leading up to this war, people were convinced that he wouldn't go into Ukraine. So understanding what's going on in the mind of the Russian president right now is very tricky.
Appreciate your analysis on the programme, Jake Cordell, for us there in Moscow. Thank you.
Dave Keating is in Brussels for us, watching all developments. There's also been a series of meetings taking place regarding energy supply in the wake of sanctions on Russia. Russia, of course, major supplier of natural gas to European countries. Dave, good evening to you. Can I ask you first, though, about that request from the Ukrainian president? How is that likely to be heard in Brussels?
I mean, there's really no prospect that Ukraine could have a fast-tracked EU accession. That's never happened before. There's really three main obstacles to that. One is that's normally a 10-year process. It would really be inconceivable that 10 years of work could be boiled down into a couple months. The other is political. Right now, there is a historic low of public support for EU expansion. And even getting those Western Balkan countries, which have been in the process for 10 years, past the line right now, looks like a pretty big ask. The third is military. The EU technically has a mutual defense clause. It was in the Lisbon Treaty that was adopted in 2009. It's not as robust as NATO's famous Article 5, but it's still there. And so in theory, if Ukraine became an EU member state next week, then EU countries would be obliged to declare war on Russia. So it's really an inconceivable prospect. What is possible is that for political reasons, for signaling reasons, the EU might decide to open up accession talks with Ukraine right now in order to send a message of support. Commission President von der Leyen seemed to suggest that last night when she said that Ukraine should be part of the European Union, but even that would encounter huge resistance here. After the experience of Turkey, there's not much appetite for opening up accession talks in order to send signals. That's what happened with Turkey many, many years ago, even though France, Germany, and many other countries really never had any intention of having Turkey in the Union. Now we still have that accession process open. It's awkward. It causes confusion. And I don't think there's a big appetite for that happening with Ukraine. That being said, we are in a rapidly changing situation. The context means that things that were unthinkable a week ago are all of a sudden thinkable. So right now in Brussels, you can't really predict anything.
Indeed, hear what you're saying completely there, David. And we're glad that you're there to decipher all this for us. Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. We're discussing the situation, of course, in Ukraine, part of our continuing coverage of the situation. Talks began on the Belarus border between representatives of Ukraine and Russia, but the one voice, of course, that counts in this whole affair, the one voice that could actually end it all with just one word is that of Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. Has he already gone too far? Some saying perhaps he has. Has he perhaps signed the end of his own time in power? With almost the whole world united against his aggression against Ukraine, we are asking, will the talks, will the sanctions be enough to stop Putin? Sanctions, of course, levelled against him personally and other prominent Russians like Sergei Lavrov, oligarchs in Russia and beyond, all linked to Putin, are asking questions about how this will affect them. And of course, on the ground, more and more support for Ukraine against this Russian invasion. Let's introduce you to our panel to debate this. Joining us by Skype from Warsaw, we have Maria Zalkina, political analyst at the Ilko Kucherev Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Maria, thank you very much for being with us. I understand from the last time we spoke, you are from Kiev, but actually joining us from Warsaw, so your insight in this one is essential. Joining us by satellite from Washington, D.C., Melinda Herring, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Melinda, thanks very much for being with us. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this situation, as ever. By Skype from Hamburg, Ulrich Kuhn, who's from the Institute for Peace, Research and Security Policy at the University of Hamburg. Ulrich, thank you for being with us. And here in the studio, Julien Theron, who's a political scientist at Sciences Po here in Paris and author of the book, and the title in French is Poutine, la stratégie du désordre, which translates as Putin, the strategy of disorder. Thank you for being with us. Before we let loose the panel to discuss the issues relating to what's happening in Ukraine right now, let's take a look at this from our reporter who is there, Gulliver Cragg.
Ivan and Serhiy never thought the war could come right to their village. But on Sunday morning, Ukrainian air defences shot down an incoming rocket, scattering debris and damaging their houses.
So that's the situation. We'd been working for years on that house, my family and my wife's family. We were planning to move in this year. You can see it's now got no roof, no windows and no doors. We won't be able to move in so soon. That's part of the debris. The rocket was aimed at somewhere else, but landed here when our forces shot it.
The air defense system worked, and they shot it down. Good that it didn't reach its target. They're not aiming at poor villagers. They want to hit our defense forces.
Nearby, galvanized by these events, villagers have set up a checkpoint and are working on a dugout.
We're going to fight the Russians and defend ourselves any way possible.
We'll fight them, of course. We're not going to let them stay and give them food.
Checkpoints like this are springing up all over the district, all over the country, in fact. The work of volunteers. Local kids are also involved.
There were more people here before, but they left because there wasn't much work.
Did you hear Putin say today he wants to prepare the nuclear weapons?
Don't worry, we'll shoot those missiles down with catapults.
Joking aside, this spirit of determination to do everything possible to fight off the Russians is to be found all over Ukraine.
Gulliver Cragg there, finding the indomitable spirits of some Ukrainian people in the face of the onslaught that is coming towards them. It has to be said, though, that the Russians perhaps not expecting the kind of resistance that they have met. Let's bring in first to comment on this Maria Zalkina, who's in Warsaw, from Kiev originally. Maria, you told me last time, political analyst at the Ilko Kucherev Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Thanks for being with us. I'm wondering what your thoughts are right now. We've had the talks on the Belarus border. We're hearing about, obviously, resistance building up within Ukraine against the Russians and people willing to basically give their lives to stop what's going on. What are your thoughts about the situation right now and where it goes?
Thank you. Yes, I'm from Kiev actually, but I was grown up in the very east of Ukraine, in Stanitsa Luganskaya. It was the checkpoint between occupied Donbas and government by Ukrainian side Donbas. So the my personal geography, let's say, of the conflict is really touching me, then touching my heart, because as of now, for instance, Stanitsa Luganskaya, my native actually town, was captured by occupational forces, but we hope it will be brought back by Ukrainian army in coming days. So when it comes to Kiev, really Russian army didn't expect, and Russian political establishment really didn't expect that kind of resistance, because in Kiev, this is around already almost 50,000 of people in so-called territorial defense forces, which are armed, which have needed equipment. The only thing they don't have is like some kind of tanks, machines, and that kind of artillery weapons. But they have automatic guns, and they have, most of them are reservists. It means that they have some kind of military experience in their past. So that is why in Kiev during last 2 days, the level of threat of Russian invasion exactly into Kiev was very high, but they didn't succeed from any direction they tried to do it. And unfortunately for us, Kiev is still a symbol for Russia. It is obvious that they are trying to encircle fully the city, to block it, and to blackmail then Ukrainians. As of now, in Kiev, in evening, the missile strikes already started. The satellite town Brovary, which is like 10 kilometers from Kiev border, I was actually living in that satellite town, so I know how it looks on the ground very well. This town was the object for airstrike attack like 30 minutes ago. At least six people are injured. So Russians are trying to capture the Kiev from all the possible directions, but all their attempts so far were not successful. And from Belarus, they have trying to add new forces. They added some new tanks columns right into Kiev. They stopped a couple of dozens kilometers from Kiev, and of course they will try to attack. But according to Ukrainian officials, to the Ministry of Defense, this day, exactly this one and maybe the next one, they're actually decisive for the situation in case Russians will not succeed neither with Kiev nor with Kharkiv, which are like two largest cities among all those around which the battles are going on. Then Russia will be actually in need to change their tactics dramatically. And here we have, on the one hand, more positive possible scenario when they will maybe try to negotiate somehow, but to a high extent, the worst possible scenario is possible because they are trying to hit residential areas, create chaos, kill as much people as they can with airstrikes and missile attacks, and destroy Ukrainian cities at all. And also the threat of using nuclear power, either from Russian territory or by missile attack on Ukrainian nuclear power plants, is also very high because on the land, Russians are not as successful as they wanted to be.
Maria, I think you've summed it up for us there. Let me just add to that, 352 people, civilians, that's the civilian death toll according to Ukraine's health ministry right now, which I think brings home just that people are dying in this conflict. It's not just about an army coming in and taking over some land. People are getting killed. Maria, thank you very much indeed. Belinda Herring there in Washington, listening to what Maria was saying there to kick off this discussion. What will Vladimir Putin be thinking right now, do you think?
That's a great question, and I think everyone wants to know that. So Vladimir Putin, the Vladimir Putin we've known and studied since the end of 1999, is not the same man today. He's acting in strange ways. He's taking greater risks than he's taken in the past. We've heard story after story of him in negotiations where he doesn't want to talk about the Minsk agreements or off-ramps, diplomatic off-ramps to the conflict. He wants to talk about Russia's historic grievances. He wants to talk about what NATO has done to him. So he's very angry, and he's behaving in a different way. He's, of course, threatened nuclear war, and no one knows, is he serious about it? It looks like from the pictures that his immediate team is very uncomfortable with this, but will they go along with it? I wish I could tell you something more. It's anyone's guess. Putin is isolated. He's been very, very isolated during COVID. And a lot of people think he may be sick or immunocompromised because he's requiring anyone who sees him to go into quarantine or to take 3 PCR tests, as he demanded of Emmanuel Macron. I think, though, I want to say something in response to what Maria said. She's right that the Ukrainian army and the Ukrainian volunteers are heroic and brave, and they're doing an amazing job. But we need to be frank. There's a moment of optimism right now. Europe has unified behind Ukraine, and that's fabulous. We're seeing things happen that I really never expected, right? The Finns have just said that they're going to send weapons. Finland and Sweden are probably going to join NATO relatively soon. This is very, very good, but we need to be analytically honest. The Russians have held back so far, and they're not going to continue to hold back. This war is going to get much, much worse, and there's going to be massive civilian casualties, and there's probably going to be 5 to 7 million Ukrainian refugees pouring into the European Union if the situation continues at the pace that it's going at now.
Indeed, already 500,000 have made the crossing over. One woman I spoke to who was in the Kiev metro last Thursday, now safe in Romania, described getting through the borders as, well, difficult to say the very least. Melinda, for now, thank you very much indeed. Humanitarian, can I bring you in to talk about, with your kind of knowledge of Putin, picking up from what Melinda was saying. His situation here, is he in a kind of an impasse where he can't go any further? Has he gone too far, or does he have a completely different take on this whole thing? What's your kind of reaction? What's your thought?
When we conceptualized this strategy of disorder with Isabelle Mandro, my co-author of the book, we understood that it was a broad strategy against the West, because the Kremlin considered itself at war with the West. Something that is very hard for us to understand, first because it's not at all our war polity, and because we have no confliction whatsoever against Russia, right? But they do consider themselves at war. I'm not talking about the Russians, I'm talking about the Kremlin itself. And in this respect, we have to understand the psyche of the people in the Kremlin. Especially talking about what we call the Siloviki, the persons who are responsible for the force, mainly intelligence services and the army. And in this respect, we were completely right to say that there is a discomfort about what is doing Vladimir Putin today, because yes, it does correspond to strategy of disorder. We can say, like, so it's the continuation of what was happening in Georgia, in Syria. Syria, pretty much indeed, like complete chaos over there, protecting a dictator, able to gas his own people, use massive torture and so on. So yes, we could say that. But in the same time, I see at least 2 elements that are really questioning about, I wouldn't say is, psyche or something like that, because I'm not, a psychologist, so I don't want to express myself on that. But still, the first one is the fact that when it's self-justified with the war on Ukraine, he used such a speech and so outrageous reasons with the genocide, the Nazis, now the drug addicts. I mean, that nobody can, with quite reasonable experience of what is happening in Ukraine, can even believe in it, right? So that's a first. That's a first. The second element is he didn't even try to bring types of proofs or even the beginning of it, and that's quite new as well. I mean, he just went to war with 1-hour speech, outrageous speech, without any kind of proof. And that's new. That's brand new. We can say that this whole adventure, I was in Kiev last month, actually, to understand precisely through my research how they conceptualize the whole resistance warfare, because they had this national resistance law at the beginning of January, and the colleagues were completely right. Now we have the territorial defense battalion, we have a bit of national guards, meaning like more or less a gendarmerie or something like that, plus the army and so on, and even a lot of initiatives from the civil society itself, from military side, but even, conceptually warfare and so on. And it's like in Moscow, they didn't see that. And it seems obvious. And this is why a lot of people actually mistaken themselves, because they thought that there would be no war. But it seemed obvious that it was going to be hell for Russian forces. But I definitely agree it will be much worse in the coming days. Syria has been created and protected to create a precedent for the whole century to make us used to an extreme type of violence, besiege cities with civilians inside, bombing hospitals, schools, markets is fine, bombing the ICRC even is fine, using gas is fine. So I definitely agree they are still holding themselves, and Vladimir Putin is saying usually things. He said that he will denazify the country, meaning that he wants to get rid of anything which is not aligned on Russia in the country. Second, he said, I will broaden the attack over there. He's saying what he's doing actually. And this means way worse. And if you understand the position he's in, like we said, the first cycle does not quite understand. Is a little bit like under attack even from the inside, the population, and potentially even the oligarchs and the Siloviki. So it's just like on a row, is just like going to go further, I think.
Julian, thank you very much indeed. Ulrich Kern, I know you're listening and clearly have things that you want to say too, from the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy there at the University of Hamburg. Parallels are being drawn, and perhaps they're it's a bit of a reach, but parallels are being drawn between what Putin's doing and what Adolf Hitler tried to do in terms of taking back land, in terms of using excuses to move into countries, those kind of things. Now, perhaps it's a bit of a reach, but what is your sense about the possibility of stopping this? I mean, do you hear anything that's given you a sense that this can be stopped?
Well, first of all, I do get drawing these parallels because what we see Mr. Putin is doing here really recalls the darkest periods of the 20th century. His talking about race, his talking about not accepting that there is a Ukrainian statehood, that there is a Ukrainian folk, the whole idea about conquering land in land warfare, that very much recalls what we heard or what we've seen in history from the Nazis. So I do get these parallels. The question, how do we get out of this whole quagmire? This is really something that concerns me since the last, let's say, 48 hours, particularly now that we see that the Russian campaign is not going as Putin expected it to be. And honestly, this is very much because of the brave fight of the Ukrainians. But I think it's also because what we see is, don't get me wrong, probably not a very professional campaign on the side of the Russians. So the point that I want to make here is what would be a good outcome here? I mean, I think most analysts expected that the Russians would be able to invade Ukraine within a couple of days or weeks. And of course, we've seen from history that those kind of aggressive leaders, the appetite comes with the eating. So if Putin is still able to achieve an early victory here, then the question would be, would he stop here, or would the next be perhaps Moldova, or perhaps even the Baltic states that are protected by Article 5 NATO commitments? The other side is, if Putin is not able to make a quick win, if this becomes a protracted conflict that goes on and costs more and more Russian soldiers' lives, will he have to back down? I don't see Putin backing down. I think then the risk really increases, and we heard that at the beginning, that perhaps Putin might ponder even employing nuclear weapons. So the question here is really, what are the potential off-ramps? And I know it might sound at this point not really morally right to think about off-ramps for a war criminal, but I think if we want to make sure that this whole thing does not become bigger than it already is right now, we really in the West need to think, what are those potential off-ramps?
Indeed, and that tag of war criminal indeed is something that has been very much associated with Vladimir Putin because of this whole campaign that he's put into Ukraine. I'm wondering, you raised the issue there about nuclear attack, Ulrich. Surely that would be madness, would it not? Because there's no such thing as a safe, contained, well-tailored nuclear attack, is there?
Well, let's just recall what the Russians put out a couple of weeks ago together with the United States, with France, with the UK, and with China. They basically echoed a statement from Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev from 1987, that is, a nuclear war cannot be won, so it should never be fought. That's something that they put in writing at the beginning of this year. So I would like to remind the Russian president that his country signed up to that. And I think that's exactly what Western leaders need to do right now. Remind the Russians that they do have a global responsibility here. And in that regard, I have to say that the reactions by Stratcom, by the US leaders, also in France, in the UK, that was exactly how you respond to these kind of threats. They basically said, look, don't do it. There's no reason to do it. We will not mirror what you're doing. Just stay calm. We know you're nuclear armed. You know we're nuclear armed. So let's just not get into that.
The nuclear deterrent is the phrase that comes back to me from my history teacher when I was a lad. Ulrich, thank you very much indeed. Let's take a look then at the nuclear arsenal, what could be at the disposal of Vladimir Putin should he choose. And he's hinted that he will. And we're hearing today that all aspects of Russia's nuclear arsenal is on standby. Emerald Maxwell with this.
Vladimir Putin raised the stakes when he ordered Russia's deterrence forces, which wield nuclear weapons, onto high alert. An alarming move, given that Moscow has the world's largest nuclear arsenal. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, last year Russia had over 6,000 warheads, slightly more than its American rival. Of these, Russia has more than 1,600 warheads deployed, meaning they're on missiles or bomber bases ready to be fired at relatively short notice. Between them, Russia and the US possess approximately 90% of the world's stockpile. In among the Russian arsenal is a weapon known by its NATO codename Satan II. The RS-28 Sarmat is the largest intercontinental ballistic missile ever made. Russian authorities claim its range exceeds 10,000 kilometers and it's capable of carrying between 10 and 15 nuclear warheads, meaning it could destroy a territory the size of France. The West fears that a constitutional shift from Russia's ally Belarus to allow nuclear missiles on its soil could now bring Moscow's devastating weapons closer to their borders.
We know what does it mean for Belarus to be nuclear. It means that Russia will put nuclear weapons in Belarus. And this is a very dangerous path.
Like other nuclear weapon states, Moscow has used its capability primarily as a deterrent. And this isn't the first time Putin has made such threats. Russian nuclear forces were also put on high alert during the 2014 annexation of Crimea to put off any retaliation.
It is very sobering watching that report. Julien, your quick reaction?
Yes, I think we did a mistake before this third invasion of Ukraine, because let's remember that it was the third one. A mistake of perception that we didn't see it coming in Western Europe, I mean, because we didn't want to listen to the Baltic states. We spoke about American alarmism and these sort of things. Now, like our guest said it, we are in a moment of triumphalism, because Europe united, changed its path, Germany invested a massive amount of money, we transfer weapons, even planes, that's brand new, we are uniting Europe and NATO. That would be a mistake, to think that now we are in a phase of triumphalism. We should not, because the crisis is continuing, it might be continuing, like we said earlier, in terms of conventional warfare, getting worse, against the civilians as well, but it might be nuclear as well. Let me say just a couple of things. When we think, like you said, Mark, when we think about nuclear, we think about Satan II, big missiles, you know, strategic bombers, strategic submarines and so on. It's not only that. It might be the case, and we shall not think that this would never happen. But there's also other things as nuclear. Actually, nuclear went tactical these last decades. We have lower enriched ammunition, and we have also what we call mini nukes, for instance, against bunkers, against facilities buried into a mountain. And we can use like operational nuclear against, for instance, a communication center or a heavily guarded base or something like that. So, I mean, we have several layers. And I worked a bit on this possibility to actually that we are wrong about nuclear being just about deterrence. You don't touch me, you don't touch, it's this mutual assured destruction doctrine. But we are way past that. And actually nuclear can be, in practice on the theatre of war, actually.
Indeed. I wonder what our viewers in Ukraine might be feeling right now, hearing this very chilling explanation about what could happen. Let's go back to Warsaw. Poland, where Maria Zolkina is awaiting us, political analyst at Iko Kucherev Democratic Initiatives Foundation, originally from Donbass, brought up in Kiev, now living in Warsaw. Maria, I'm asking you to speak for the whole country of Ukraine. How do you think people are feeling right now, hearing this?
People are really scared with the probability of usage of nuclear weapon by Russia. The fact is that after invasion of Russia and after these absolutely cruel airstrikes and missile attacks on people, on ordinary people, on civilians, the general perception of the situation among locals is that Putin is a mad guy. And as far as we see, up to this moment, he is of course not ready to give up with his invasion into Ukraine, and it seems that he can be, let's say, cornered to some extent. If he is not succeeding with his original plan of Blitzkrieg, he is not. We understand that he is not succeeding. He hasn't succeeded with that. Up to this moment. So he has to increase the level of casualties against civilians. He has to destroy our cities. And another idea is to create ecological catastrophe, or to use cruel instruments in terms of using nuclear weapons. I will remind to our audience that yesterday Russia has already organized missile attack on the settlement near Kiev, where the radioactive waste disposal site is. And it was just fortune that missiles just landed very close to the to this site, to this disposal, but not inside the storage actually of radioactive elements themselves. So people really are scared with the possibility of using this kind of mad instrument against Ukraine, and that is why these days the most let's say popular demand towards our partners on the side of Ukrainian people is to make at least to try to make the sky safe. Of course, it will not help in case Russia will use nuclear weapons against Ukraine and the whole Europe, but at least it will help to prevent all those cruel airstrikes and missile attacks against civilians in residential areas. And that is why so people are talking mainly only about it, not about other sanctions, but about the idea to create urgently safe zone, non-fly zone above Ukraine. And this is not a military mean like Western countries as of now think, and as they explain to us that this is the argument, it will be military confrontation between NATO and Russia, and everyone in NATO still wants to prevent this kind of confrontation. But it is also can be considered as a humanitarian mean, as a humanitarian idea to prevent this cruel developments in Ukraine.
Maria, thank you very much indeed. Just reminding people, Ukraine's health ministry says 352 people, civilians, have been killed. Among those, sadly, 14 children. As Maria was speaking to us, we saw images that our team in Ukraine has filmed of basically women, children, you've got babes in arms, sheltering from what might happen. We're hearing here on set that there could be a kind of low-grade nuclear usage of weaponry which could target any kind of place that the Russians want to strike. The resistance continues with the civilians standing up in Ukraine and slowing down that Russian advance. Melinda Herring from the Atlantic Council, I'd like to bring you back in. Eurasia specialist, of course, as I think is apparent from everything you say. Vladimir Putin, madman or Machiavel? What do you think? Is it a mix of both, perhaps?
I think both, Mark. Do you mind if I pull us back from the nuclear
Please,
abyss for
go
just
ahead,
a minute
go ahead.
and offer a tiny bit of hope?
Please, go on.
Okay, great. I thought this... Okay, I'm usually the skunk at the garden party, but I can't do that today. You guys have outpaced me. So I want to make an argument. I'm a think tank expert. I'm not an Old Testament prophet, so I'm not going to give you a date. But I think it's pretty clear that Putin is done, and he's severely miscalculated. So Vladimir Putin thinks he understands Ukraine better than he actually does. He thought that he could go into Ukraine, and it would be only a matter of days and hours for Kiev and the country to roll over. And he's finding a fierce resistance, as Maria has said. Not only is the Ukrainian army much stronger than he expected, we've seen thousands of ordinary peoples, lawyers, accountants, doctors, who are now running around the country with AK-47s. Do they have the same kind of training as Russian military? No, they don't. You know, some of them do have a military background. Is it enough? No. Russia has a much better Air Force and a much better Navy. But with, they're much more determined than the Russian forces are. They know that this struggle is existential. They've been fighting this war for 8 years, and it's also their home turf. So they do have a number of advantages. But I think we also have to look at what's going on in Russia itself. So in the last week, there were protests across Russia. Are they massive and going to shake Putin to the ground now? No. But there were protests in 53 different cities. We're seeing Russian oligarchs coming out and condemning Vladimir Putin. We know that more and more people don't want to support the war effort. And Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, gave an incredibly powerful address. He spoke in Russian to the Russian people, and he said, Ukraine is not what you think it is. We don't want war. We want peace. And he called on all Russian citizens to resist. I had chills up my spine. I think it was very, very powerful. So look, I can't tell you when it's going to happen, but Putin's legitimacy is eroding before our eyes.
Indeed, those protests that we've seen, Melinda, in Moscow around Russia against this, I'll say unprecedented. It's an overused word these days, but it is something you don't see very often in Russia, that kind of open dissent in the streets.
That's absolutely right. And I think it's important to remind your viewers, too, that Russia has changed a lot since 2014. So in 2014, Putin came into Ukraine and he annexed the Crimea Peninsula. It was illegal. And then he tried to take part of the Donbass. And he's been occupying about 7% of the Donbass for 8 years. When that happened in 2014, there were massive protests in Moscow. Russians didn't like it, but Russia has changed a lot since 2014. It's become increasingly repressive. Almost all the opposition has moved abroad. Independent media has been suppressed. Civil society has been suppressed. So it's really hard to get people to come out on the streets because they're afraid of being put in jail and they're afraid for their physical security. So the fact that we're seeing protests across Russia is extraordinary.
Indeed, Russian propaganda units RT, Sputnik being banned in the EU. The similar bans in the UK. Russia's likely to ban the BBC. France 24, we understand, still available everywhere. So we'll continue to give the truth and tell the story straight down the middle with no bias. But, you know, we can only reflect what we see, what we hear, what we know, and what our correspondents find. And this is what we're trying to do here, and bring in some expert analysis too. Ulrich in Hamburg from the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy, Ulrich Kuhn. Germany's position's changed, that of Finland to that of Sweden. Putin perhaps succeeding in uniting his enemies all against him.
Yeah. That's certainly one of the inadvertent outcomes, I would say, at least from the perspective of Mr. Putin. I think no one was expecting the European Union to rally around the flag that fast. I think no one was expecting that Germany would really see that as a watershed moment, that Germany would actually give up on its policy of economics first, but now actually turns to a security first policy. And particularly when we also look at the other states that are not a part of either NATO or the European Union, even skeptical countries like Switzerland and Austria are coming on board. So I think that's he has succeeded to build a front. The question is, what do we do with that now? And the question is what happens in Russia. I have to say I'm not as optimistic as Melinda is as regards the Russians rising up against Mr. Putin. I hope they would, but from what I hear from Moscow, this seems not to be really the case. And I mean, I personally could imagine at some point that we might see a palace coup where some of Putin's inner clique, particularly perhaps from the armed forces, actually decide that it's enough with that leader. But let's be careful what we're wishing for, because this is Russia. We have no idea what comes after Putin. We think that's the worst outcome. Well, let's not be naive. We don't know whether the next leader in Russia will be the democratic president of our liking.
Indeed. Ulrich, thank you very much indeed. It was Julian earlier who mentioned Georgia 2008, of course, when Putin found an excuse to go in and support two Georgian enclaves who'd apparently asked for his support. Let's hear now from the president of Georgia, who's in Paris. She was speaking earlier.
I think that he is becoming aware that he has given birth to a monster. He has created a Europe more powerful than has ever existed before. Everything he feared, that is to say to have states that are unified and strong militarily at his border, he is going to get that.
Salam Zurabashvili there, the president of Georgia. Julian Terron, this is possibly the final comment, but we'll try to get everybody in if I possibly can. Has a monster been created? Can the monster be stopped? What happens next?
I think that the war in Ukraine cannot be won by the Russians. We have no, in war studies, we have no example of a conventional army staying on the long run on a territory, especially on a territory on 44 million inhabitants, where, yes, a lot of them left, but not that much regarding 44 million, right? They cannot. They just cannot. And indeed, I think that Vladimir Putin is reading not that well Ukraine, and I think he might be reading not that well Russia neither. It's a war also inside Russia, although it's not a conventional military over there. It's political, but it matters a lot indeed. So the problem there, and I do agree with Ulrich that he has to find a way out. If he doesn't find a way out, he will go further and further and further until, you know, keeping the power, whatever danger he creates for us, all the Europeans and the Russians as well. So we are in a strategic situation which is really tensed. And obviously, the main power rests actually in the hands of the Russians themselves. But yes, Melinda said it. Yeah, well, actually, they live in a very repressed society more than in 2014, indeed. So it's quite difficult to say if they manage to, you know, create a new democratic society in Russia, right? Or if perhaps, because that's a possibility, that a new leader in Russia, post-Vladimir Putin, hyper-centralized power might be actually even worse.
My producer, Alessandro, has stolen more time for us so I can get everybody in before we end the show. Let's go to Maria back in Warsaw. Maria, the what happens next question is what I'm putting to you. And we heard, obviously, that we don't know quite what follows Vladimir Putin. Ulrich was talking about that, I think. From your perspective, from where you're looking at this thing in Warsaw, what is the worst case scenario? If he is taken away, if he is pushed aside, what do you think will happen next?
The worst possible scenario is that he really attacks some critical enterprises, including nuclear power plant. I remind that in Zaporizhia, which is very close to the active battlefield, and Zaporizhia itself was already hit by missiles, but not as heavily as other cities of Ukraine. In Zaporizhia, the biggest nuclear power station in Europe is situated. Besides of that, Russians have occupied and controlled the Chernobyl zone, and according to radiologists, the level of radiation is already increasing right there. So as of now, this is the worst possible scenario, which will be supported by the hostilities and casualties against ordinary people in residential areas all over Ukraine. That's why Ukraine needs as much weapons as it possible, including air defense system. The maximum which Ukraine, full isolation of Russia in terms of financial connections and all other means of isolation. And Ukraine's maximum goal for these coming days is to stand firm, to keep all the cities controlled by Ukrainian government, and to continue to demand NATO countries to support Ukraine either with the most serious possible air defense system or maximum with non-fly zone above Ukraine.
Maria, thank you very much indeed. Ulrich, can I bring you back in? Ulrich from the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy. That idea of more arms, is that the solution? Obviously, the EU's decided on this unprecedented, and there's that word again, 450 million euro military aid, which is going to be given to help Ukraine. Is that the right thing?
Well, I think in the end, for the next couple of days and weeks, the West needs to walk an extremely fine line between supporting the Ukrainian army, also with weapons, and at the same time making sure that the West does not end up in an inadvertent escalation scenario with Russia, between Russia and NATO. In that regard, I'm against the establishment of a no-fly zone because technically it would mean to take out Russian forces via NATO forces, and I think that's exactly the kind of scenario that we need to avoid in the end.
Ulrich, thank you very much indeed. Final comment will go to Melinda Haring, Eurasia specialist at the Atlantic Council. And I'm wondering, Melinda, and obviously take this wherever you want and say whatever you wish, but what does Joe Biden do when he hears all these things about the nuclear threat?
I think Joe Biden knows that we can't blink right now, and Zelensky knows that we can't blink right now. One thing that we haven't talked about during this debate is the massive change in President Zelensky. I'm one of his biggest critics. There's a lot of critics in Washington. He was not a good president for the first 2 years. He backtracked on almost all of the important anti-corruption and judicial reform, but he's become a world-class leader in the last 5 days. He's shown a stiff upper lip. He's inspired the world. When reports came out that the U.S. had offered him a lift out of Kiev, he said, "I don't need a lift, I need ammo." He is walking around. He's not hiding in a bunker. He's communicating with people. And I think that we have seen the birth of a great leader who is inspiring the West and reminding us why the West was great and that we have to fight for freedom every single day. So that I'm keeping my eye on Zelensky, and we know that the Russians want to assassinate him, and that would be a big loss. But Ukraine will still survive without Zelensky. And I think the battle for Kiev is going to be pivotal. We know that there's U.S. intel assessments that say that Kiev will fall in a couple of days. We don't know. We don't know what Vladimir Putin is thinking. We don't know what his general staff is thinking. Let's hope and pray that they can talk some sense into him.
Melinda, thank you very much indeed. Melinda Haring there from the Atlantic Council. Thanks to Ulrich Kohn from the University of Hamburg. Thanks to Maria Ozlakina of the Kucherev Democratic Initiatives Foundation. And thanks to my guest here in studio, Julien Daron of Sciences Po, author of La Stratégie du Désordre. Putin, La Stratégie du Désordre. Thank you so very much indeed. And thanks to you for watching too. Stay with us here for more coverage on the Ukraine crisis here on France 24.
Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. Our guest is Yulia Tymoshenko. She's the former Prime Minister of Ukraine. She joins us from Kiev, where she's staying to help to defend her country against the Russian aggression. Madame Tymoshenko, thank you very much for being with us. You're still involved in politics and now in the defense of your country. What is your state of mind right now? A very difficult time for you and your fellow citizens.
Все, про що зараз думають українці, вони думають, як таке могло трапитися.
All what the Ukrainians think about now is how could this happen
Європейську країну
at the 21st century,
бити ракетами.
right in the center of Europe, in the European capital Silti.
І наших чоловіків.
We see the city bombed by the missiles.
Як світ
Tanks are assaulting us,
і друге,
and civilian people, innocent people are being killed.
як
How can the world let this happen?
наших дітей.
Second thing
Нашої країни.
the Ukrainians think about, how to defend our families, our independence, the independence of our country.
Could you have imagined Russian troops in Ukraine and surrounding the capital, Kiev?
Où vous vous trouvez maintenant?
Absolutely no.
Але сьогодні,
No one could have imagined
коли вони захопили
such a situation, but it is obvious
ми ніколи
that it did happen, as you see.
за нашу країну, що вони підуть на
When
Україну
Putin seized Crimea and Donbass, no one could imagine that they will start a full-scale war. No one could imagine that. But today, missiles and bombs are falling on our heads, and our people are killed. And the world should unite to put an end to this.
What is the origin of the problem Ukraine is facing right now?
Я думаю, що
I
головна
think
причина того, що
that
зараз відбулося, це те, що
The main reason
Росія чомусь вирішила,
why things are happening this way is that Putin, the Kremlin, Russia, for unknown reasons, have decided that an independent Ukraine is part and parcel of their country, their fatherland, as they say. And if they cannot seize it through political means, they think they have the right to recoup Ukraine through military means, subdue Ukraine, and get this back to what was once the Soviet Union. But the whole world will not let them do that.
How far do you think Vladimir Putin will go, in your opinion?
Коли я бачу насилля, яке сьогодні панує,
Well, when I see the violence
бомблять дитячі садочки, школи,
that
лікарні,
is exerted on Ukraine with the bombs on the kindergartens, on the schools, the hospitals,
які сьогодні має кожен
the destruction of the housing, of civilian housings. I share the pain of each and every Ukrainian and of the whole world. We thank you, your country, and all those who share our pain. And I would want us to unite to stop all this. The whole world should unite to put an end to this violence, because Ukraine is the heart. And if we allow Putin to pierce this heart, if we will not make Ukraine able to defend itself, we will fail. We have to defend the whole world from terrorism and from this violence.
Ms. Tymoshenko, you're talking to us from Kiev. You're still there. Will Ukraine defend itself until the very end?
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire ça?
It is important to us now, because in a few hours from now, the General Assembly of the United Nations will gather. So it is very important that the peacekeeping force would be invited and could come to Ukraine. It is absolutely important that the whole world would be on our side, the side of the Ukrainians, so that the whole world would stop the aggressor. It is very important to close the airspace above Ukraine in front of any Russian plane, in front of any missile, because today this is a direct threat, not only against Ukraine, but for all of Europe. We have 4 nuclear power plants and 4 power plants of this kind. And if the army of Putin had the intent to bomb our nuclear power plants, this would be a tragedy, doubtlessly, for the whole of the continent. This is why we say to the whole world and to NATO, stop and close the airspace above the Ukraine, so that no plane or missile from Russia could reach us or hit us.
The nuclear threat from Vladimir Putin, what does it represent for you?
Сьогодні війна, яку Путін почав проти України,
Today,
для нього є вирішальною. Зараз
we see
український народ
the war Putin started against the Ukraine, and for him this war is decisive.
Але знаючи, наскільки радикально він налаштований, ми думаємо,
We,
що він не зупинить.
Ukraine, are the first to push back, to resist Putin. But I think he will use all the possibilities. This is why I mentioned the nuclear power plants and the possibility that he would hit those nuclear power plants. So it is impossible to leave Ukraine on its own in face of this such powerful army. We thank the whole world for the support, for the sanctions against Putin's regime, and for the delivery of military equipment to Ukraine. But we must again get back to this question of the peacekeeping force of the United Nations, because if such a peacekeeping force doesn't reach the Ukraine, and if the airspace above Ukraine isn't closed, there will be a problem for the whole continent and for the world. Ukraine renounced willfully to the nuclear weapon. The Memorandum of Budapest was signed by Ukraine, Russia, United States, and the UK, and France and Germany. And then this memorandum was supposed to give guarantees for the territory and for peace in the Ukraine and its protection. I see that the whole world starts to mobilize in favor of the Ukraine, but the power of the Russian army is so large that we do need a support to close the Ukrainian airspace to any missile or to any Russian plane.
Ms. Tymoshenko, just to finish, what is your message for the people of Ukraine?
Я хочу зараз звернутися до кожного українця.
I would like to say to each and every Ukrainian, Ukrainians, you are courageous, you're strong, you love freedom, you live in a democratic country, you love your families and your children. Do hold on, please. Defend our freedom. We are united and strong. I want us to be persuaded that we will win, that Ukraine could be again a flourishing country at the heart of Europe, a free country. Do hold on and win this war, my dear Ukrainians.
Yulia Tymoshenko, thank you very much for being our host here on the France 24 interview. Stay tuned for more news.
Time now for our fact-checking segment, Truth or Fake, and I'm joined by Catalina Marchandiabreu. Welcome to Catalina. Now, let's go to the coverage of the war in Ukraine, and let's start with that claim that Russia is using mobile crematoriums in Ukraine to hide their losses. Tell us more.
Indeed, Tom. The Telegraph reported that Russia would be using mobile crematoriums to follow their troops into Ukraine as a way to hide their losses. This was reported on February 23rd, so one day before the invasion. This is their headline right here. Russia deploys mobile crematoriums to follow its troops into battle. And it's mostly based on statements made by the UK Defense Secretary, Ben Wallace, where he's referring to Russia's previous use of crematoriums when fighting burst out in eastern Ukraine in 2015, and where in the days leading to the imminent invasion, Wallace expresses his concerns over these military tactics. He says that this is chilling and that they've done this before and that they expect that they will do this again. And they also say that this footage was released by the MOD, by the Ministry of Defense. So the problem here is with the specification of the facts. They don't specify that these images are old or unrelated images to the current conflict. They have this video right here as well saying, chilling footage shows mobile crematorium which can be used for Russian soldiers. So this whole report can be easily taken out of context and people can quickly start confirming that they are indeed using mobile crematoriums in Ukraine, as they already have. In Twitter right here, they say Russian has introduced mobile crematoriums to follow Russian troops. This other user says Russia's mobile crematoriums designed to evaporate dead soldiers and hide the true scale of the war. And even further, saying International Tribunal at The Hague processes formal complaint of targeting civilians, hospitals, and children. The use of heat rays and atrocity racing mobile crematoriums is a known illegal tactic. The problem is that this isn't a confirmed tactic that they've been using just yet, but we will detail where the original images come from. So we saw the original video posted right here by this company on August 2013, and this is the same video that was used by the Telegraph. And when we went into the company's website, it specifies that it's a Russian incinerator construction company. So finally, there's also been many reports back in 2015 using the same video of these mobile crematoriums used to incinerate bodies of Russian soldiers in Donbass, and this was also covered by Ukrainian media, where Russian soldiers burned in mobile crematoriums, and by Western media as well. But there is no independent reporting to confirm or not that these crematoriums were used either in 2015 or in 2022. Tom.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Thank you, Catalina Marcin-Diabreu, for today's edition of Truth or Fake.
Let's go now to Ukraine for the first of our visits to our team there. Catherine Norris-Trent is our reporter who's been following all developments for us. We join her now live. She's in Kropivnitsky in Ukraine. Catherine, tell us about what you've been seeing. Tell us about what's been happening.
Good evening, Mark. Yeah, we've been travelling for the past few days around southern central Ukraine from east to west, and what we've been seeing has been quite revealing, really, because in major cities people are mobilising at speed to do whatever they can to bring the fight to the Russians. So you've got droves of people signing up to join, to volunteer to join the territorial defence classes. I mean, there are people with whole families are signing up to join, with adult children. Of course, you've got the husband, wife and the grown-up kids all laying down their usual jobs and tools and picking up guns to fight. And we've seen people digging trenches and reinforcing checkpoints on the edges of towns and cities, and there are lots of identity checks going on, checks of vehicles and searches, because there's also a lot of mistrust in this central area. People are worried about the possibility of Russian saboteurs coming into their midst and carrying out operations from inside these towns and cities in the center of Ukraine. We know that people have been told to climb onto their rooftops and check if there are any suspicious markings that have even been painted on there, which could guide Russian aircraft or provide indications for future strikes. So people are taking this very seriously. We've seen people really rushing around, gathering clothes, food, blankets, anything they can find that could either be taken to help the soldiers and the volunteers in battle, or that can be taken to hospital, because in this region, injured fighters have been being transferred to hospitals, which are getting pretty full in this area now.
And Catherine, are you getting a sense from people that you're meeting, and you've mentioned this already about people joining up, getting arms and preparing to fight, that they are prepared to put their lives on the line very much to defend this country?
They absolutely are. It's been really incredible, because when you question people about whether they're optimistic that Ukraine can see off the advance of Russian troops, well, a lot of people are. And it might look surprising perhaps from the outside, because you see the might of the Russian military that Vladimir Putin has gathered around several of the country's borders. And this, of course, is a complex and multi-pronged assault. But you speak to people and they are very optimistic. Lots of them have this incredible spirit of resistance, and there's been videos going viral on social media here of famous actors, singers and people in public life who've also volunteered to join these territorial defense forces. And of course then you've got Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, who's refused to be flown out of Ukraine and has been wearing military fatigues and fighting on the streets of Kiev and telling people to keep calm, that he's here, that he doesn't need a ride out of the country, he needs more ammunition. So you have this sense of a Ukrainian public that is very much galvanized. And I think it's taken a lot of people somewhat by surprise, even the volunteers who were mobilizing. We asked them whether they expected the turnout, the mobilization to be this strong in this area. And they said they didn't, but they're very proud of their country, and that in their eyes, it shows Russia that Ukraine is not going to give up without a fight.
Kropivnitsky, Catherine, tell us about the place where you are. Tell us about what people there are expecting. What are they bracing for?
Well, people in this town and in others in the region before are nervous, because there haven't been big strikes on this area yet, but there's this constant feeling that the Russian forces aren't very far away. We know that they have been advancing from the south of Ukraine, from Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014, and there've been continuing battles around strategic points, infrastructure installations and ports down there. And then there's been this constant fear that the Russian troops are working their way further north up the Dnieper River, which is the major waterway going down through Ukraine. And there are a lot of fears because there's a major hydroelectric dam on the river here, and nuclear power stations which supply a lot of Ukraine with electricity. And of course, this is a huge strategic point. So people are worried that, what would happen if that fell into Russians' hands? People have heard what Vladimir Putin has alluded to, talking about getting special nuclear deterrent troops on the ready. So there is nervousness, and people know that they are in a key area. There are sporadic strikes on areas such as near airports or factories or plants like this, and there are air-raid sirens. They're not under heavy fire, but they're very aware that they could be next in line.
Catherine Norris-Trent in Kropivnitsky in Ukraine, thank you very much indeed. Take care, you and the team out there, and well done on the work so far. It's been
Thanks, Mark.
Really informative and essential stuff that we've been getting from our team all across Ukraine.
In other news, the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov is an ally of Vladimir Putin, and he said that Chechen fighters are currently deployed in Ukraine alongside Russian soldiers. It is an issue our terrorism expert Wasim Nasser has been looking at for us, and he's with me right now. Wasim, who are these Chechen fighters, and do we know where they are?
Yes, actually those are the men of Kadyrov. It's not the first time that he engages his men to back the Russian army in military operations abroad. The last time was in Syria, and they were called the military police, acting in Syria a few years back and still today. What we should know is that the Chechnya is part of the Russian Federation. So he is engaged as in the ranks of the Russian army, despite the fact that those are his men, and they are responsible of many human rights abuses, either in Chechnya or abroad. We know where they are because they filmed themselves in many spots. If we can see a map, we can see where exactly they were seen involved. So they were involved north of Crimea, in the push of the Russian army north of Crimea, and also around the nuclear plant of Chernobyl, the exclusion area around the nuclear plant of Chernobyl. And we have the footage of both. Maybe we can see. So in the first footage here, we see north of Crimea. It's a Chechen soldier. He's going to be removing the Ukrainian flag and putting a Chechen flag to replace it. But the most interesting is the military convoys that we saw next to Chernobyl, because very important military convoys. Here they are. We should know that this footage here, we see them praying. We should know that this footage was filmed by the Chechens themselves and put on social media by the Chechen himself without saying where they are, but we got to know where it was. We know that another convoy, not this convoy, was hit by the Ukrainians further south. So actually, we don't know what happened to this very imposing convoy as we speak. But what we should imagine is that they are there, and they were there prior to the announcement of Kadyrov from Grozny, which happened yesterday.
Might the presence of these Chechen soldiers actually be able to change the course of the war in Russia's favor?
Well, we should know that they were always, as we were saying, part of military operations, but not a pivot point of the military operations. And here also we see them north of Chernobyl. And this is the big gathering that was made in Grozny, the Chechen capital. Here we see Ramzan Kadyrov speaking. In the background, we had jihadi a cappella, sayings, and mixed with music, mixed with something like which gave it like a religious color, but actually no, it's not giving religious justification for the fight, but actually they are fighting, and at the end of the day, for Kadyrov. We see that we have thousands of fighters here, but we don't know what would be really the impact on the ground, because one more time they were always backing the Russian army, but never a part of real military operations. We had information that some Chechens were caught in Kiev trying to make some trouble before the beginning or at the beginning of the Russian military operation, knowing that as we speak, maybe the military operation is going too slow if we look at it as a way to put down the Ukrainian state, but it's going in the norms, or as a military operation, complex military operation should go. With big convoys, with soldiers, with tanks, etc., etc. So at the first phases of this military operation, maybe the Russian president would have liked it to go faster, but we are in the regular norms of a military operation as we speak. Maybe they will have another role, but I guess that the role that Chechen fighters will have is more of a propaganda and psychological role to put pressure on Ukrainians, knowing their reputation as fighters and the reputation regarding human rights abuses in Chechnya and abroad.
Thanks for your reporting, Wasim Nasser, for us there on the programme.
For more on the story, we can bring in Alexander Stubb, the former Finnish Prime Minister. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. Now, over the weekend, we saw the EU ramp up its sanctions against Russia quite significantly. We had Russian banks kicked out of the SWIFT banking system. EU airspace was closed to Russian airlines and the private jets of oligarchs. Is all of this enough, in your opinion?
Well, it's a good start. And I always said from the beginning that the sanctions are going to happen in waves. I think there are two elements here. The first one is Ukrainian resistance. I think that's key at the moment, and that's why any sort of exporting or donation of arms and armaments is very welcome for Ukraine to be able to defend itself. And the other one is sanctions. And I think on the sanctions, we should be realistic. The short-term effect is very small, but the idea is that it will hit long-term. I think personally that Russia will be completely isolated politically and economically, and this will hit hard in the long term.
Let's talk about the short term, because clearly the idea is to impact Vladimir Putin's oligarch friends hard enough so they will have some sort of sway on his decision-making process. In your opinion, what do you think is the Russian president's endgame?
It's very difficult to say what his endgame is. I mean, in international relations, we of course have different theories. You know, the madman theory is one whereby you play irrational, but you're actually a very rational player. I think the end game or the vision that Putin had when all this started and escalation started was of historic Russia, basically returning to the borders of the 1800s with one language, one religion, and one leader. And that, of course, brought with it then, the annexation, if you will, of Belarus and then of Ukraine. We simply don't know how far he's going to push this and what kind of instruments he's using. But I think paradoxically, the effect of what he's done is completely the opposite of what he thought it would be. We're seeing a Europeanization of Ukraine. We're seeing a rejuvenation of NATO. We are seeing a united West and a united European Union. We are seeing populations around the world rushing to the support of Ukraine. So basically, I think this could potentially spell the beginning of the end to Putin. And to add insult to injury, opinion polls in Finland and Sweden are moving towards NATO membership.
I want to ask you about that in a second, but I want to touch on a point which you just mentioned about how this whole conflict in Ukraine has actually resulted in the European Union becoming more than just an economic powerhouse. And as Emmanuel Macron cited in December, the bloc seems to be becoming a master of its own destiny.
Yeah, in many ways. And I've always said that the European Union advances through crisis. It did that after the Cold War by enlarging in 1995 and 2004. And of course, after the financial crisis, we took tremendous steps in economic and financial integration of the Eurozone. During the migration crisis, I think the steps were modest. During COVID, once again, we've gone beyond the remit of, I think, what the European Union usually does. And now we're seeing exactly the same thing in the security field. As I've always said, and this is especially to Ursula von der Leyen, who I think is doing an excellent job, it's not the president that makes the agenda, it's the agenda that makes the president. And I think the European Union, all of its institutions and all of its leaders have now stepped up to the plate. So that's at least the silver lining in this horrible crisis.
You mentioned this point that this crisis will only push Finland and Sweden closer towards NATO, potentially even to join the military alliance one day. But Moscow has warned of consequences, serious consequences, should that happen. Do you believe that this is a serious threat or just bluster from Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think you're probably making reference to the spokeswoman of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Zakharova, who a couple of days said that there would be ramifications of Finnish and Swedish NATO membership. For us, this is nothing new. We've heard it from Foreign Minister Lavrov, and we've heard it from Putin as well. I think the assessment that both Sweden and Finland will have to make is to answer the question, has the security situation in Europe, and especially in northeastern Europe, radically changed? If the answer is yes, then they have to take a decision on, okay, what happens next? What we're seeing now is a movement of opinion polls. We saw one over the weekend in Sweden, first time in its history, where 41% of the population is in favor, 35 against, and 25 undecided. And I expect to see some kind of an opinion poll here in Finland this week. And I think there will be, if not an overwhelming, at least a majority for NATO membership. But I do think that our political leaders, both in Sweden and Finland, have to keep a cool head in this situation. I think preparation and timing is key.
Moscow is becoming increasingly isolated on the world stage. No Russian planes can land in Europe today. Russia cannot participate in Eurovision. We're not going to have the Russian flag seen at football matches. This is all going to ramp up in the days to come. Do you think this influences Vladimir Putin's decision-making process in any way, the fact that his country is isolated on the world stage, and in a few hours' time, the UN General Assembly will be talking about the crisis in Ukraine?
Yes, it will certainly influence. The problem we have in the West and elsewhere in the world that we don't know in which direction. He has been now totally cornered. We are seeing a Russia which will be totally isolated from the rest of the world. Yes, there will be probably leaning then eastbound of the Russian Federation. But this is all the doing of Vladimir Putin. And, when it starts to hit sports, when it starts to hit energy, when it starts to hit trade, I think what we have to start seeing also is things bubbling inside Russia, because we have to understand that regime change will not come through external pressure. It will have to come through Russia. And one of the avenues that I see coming is this military conflict and the casualties that take place with young Russian soldiers. Remember, these are kids which were born, late 1990s, early 2000, and they have parents, they have mothers. And if they feel that this is an unnecessary war, which it is, no matter how much propaganda you push into the Russian system at the moment, I think it will have consequences. That's why I keep on saying this could potentially be the end or the beginning of the end of Vladimir Putin, but we just don't know how long the path towards the end might be and what will happen in the interim. And that is what I am rather worried about.
And to be fair, we did have thousands of people taking to the streets across cities in Russia in the aftermath of this invasion in Ukraine. But of course, they were put in jail pretty quickly after. Mr. Saab, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you.
The European Union has warned that over 7 million people could be displaced as a result of the war. Some 500,000 have already fled the country, and many of them are now in Poland. The government there has waived visa requirements for Ukrainians and is offering free transport through the country. Well, our reporter Emmanuel Shaz is at the Polish border, and we can speak to her right now. Emmanuel, just tell us a little bit about where you are and what it is you've witnessed in the past couple of hours.
Well, we've just arrived here in Rebene. It's at the border with Ukraine. In fact, you see Ukraine behind the checkpoint that you can see here. What you might also see at this border checkpoint, you can also see buses. Those are the buses that will transport Ukrainian refugees and anybody fleeing Ukraine towards other cities here in Poland, a neighboring nation and a nation where people really showed solidarity and are really ready to help. I just came, I drove through the country today. I've just arrived. I saw some Ukrainian flags on buses in Warsaw, and you can see those grey buses at the back where that will drive refugees elsewhere. Also, something that I've seen when I arrived here is people completely exhausted walking along this road, which is usually a very busy road. It's a place where you have a lot of traffic, and at the moment there's absolutely nobody. There's only ambulances, firefighters sometimes who pass, police, Polish police, and of course nobody can go back. Can enter Ukraine anymore from that road. But you can see people with their suitcases, with their with their belongings, all that they could bring with them, just walking. Those who didn't come with a car, just walking. They are completely exhausted. To be honest, the ones I saw, I didn't want to even ask them anything. They didn't want to talk. It was clear. It was really clear that they've been walking for hours. Other people you might see, also cars just right behind me. Even the cars are a statement of what just happened. The cars also look like they've really been through this whole thing. There's people of all ages. There's also elderly people here. And I've talked to a student, a Zambian student who was here, who told me, we've been hearing reports of crossing borders being being more difficult for people of color. And I saw this Zambian student who told me it wasn't easy to reach this border. Fortunately, he managed to cross as well. So thousands of Ukrainians are crossing this border, as well as everybody who was in Ukraine, students, refugees as well, who are trying to flee what has become a war zone.
And Emmanuel, just give us a sense of what conditions are like where you are. We've been hearing that it's extremely cold indeed. And as you say, people have been walking for hours, if not days, to get to the safety of where you are.
Well, if you see behind me, there's in those buses some people waiting. There are also there's even a group of people who are here on the side of the road. They're either waiting another car, they're waiting for that buses. There's also temporary toilets just there. If I can turn the camera a little bit, we might see just over there. Oops. Can you still see me?
We see you, Emmanuel. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, you can see temporary toilets having been put there, people entering. So very dire situation here at the border.
Emmanuel Shaz live at the Polish border. Thank you very much indeed for your reporting today.